Ja, ich kann schon sagen.
Welcome back to this to the panels in the afternoon. I'm happy to see you back at this round of discussions. Now we're prepared for for a chat. We don't have a physical round table, but it will be here when you will get involved, when you ask the questions, when you intervene with your comments. And these discussions are online. I'll moderate this discussions. I'm Karoline. I come from Stuttgart. I work in an organization which is working in the area of culture and civil society. I am responsible for Eastern Europe and Asia. Today we'll talk about the current challenges of Moldova from various angles. On the one hand, we have historians and scientists, but also sociologists, and I introduce you the speakers. Florin, he is the director of the Institute in the area of research of totalitarianism. This is an organization that is organizing this event, and they are in the committee from 2014, and he is responsible for political sciences. Petru Negura is near me. He comes from the State University of Moldova. He comes from the Institute for Research in the area of the legal, political, and social areas. He's a sociologist, and he had more researches in various European countries, and we're very happy to have him with us. To my left, from Germany, Klaus Bochmann, Dr. Bochmann. He was introduced before. From 2005, Professor Bochmann is the head of the Leipzig Moldova Institute, and from 1978 he's also a scientific researcher, and he works in the area of international exchanges with different countries. We're very happy, Professor Bochmann, that you are with us. And Jana Stöxen, she comes from Regensburg, and she does her PhD at the University of Regensburg. She's an expert in the area of migration, and she will talk about transnational migration, and she will talk about the relations of the Moldovan diaspora in Germany. Thank you for being with us today. And we start with a more dynamic round after the lunch. And of course, we have some introductory remarks. I've asked, for instance, if we have what would be the first challenge for Moldova, which you would mention besides your area of research? So the afternoon is the most difficult because people are assimilating their food, but we're trying to give some elements of spiritual challenge so that the fight between spirituality and physical environment is a winner. So to provoke a breaking news, I think the key challenge here, I don't know if it's a challenge, but I don't know how quick it will happen or how quick it will be solved. The challenge is to build the consensus, internal consensus in this country on how Moldova should develop. Of course, I would say that we building consensus for the pro-European path, and so for 20th of October is called in history so this is a moment which is key in the history of a country. So they remain possibly important. It's a turning point, basically. So president and parliament is elected or not, depending on who the candidate is, but introducing some very clear constitutional elements towards European integration can be a point of reference. Not when it comes to its legal or constitutional value, but the fact that the population will give a message and clarify things inside the society when it comes to a majority of the population going towards European Union. And once done, and of course it will be done, things will be more simple when it comes to international legitimacy, because not all EU member states want to enlarge, not all parties want to enlarge the EU. So for international legitimacy, it is not just the will of some elites or some politicians or parties, but this is the will of a society democratically expressed. So I think that this is the key stake. It was understood, and that's why we have European leaders and Romanian leaders coming here to Moldova to show that the borders of Europe in relation to Russia are not ending on Prut, but they end on Nistru. Thank you. Following up what Mr. Abraham said, I think that the challenge facing currently the society of Moldova society is about this traditional geopolitical split, but now it becomes much more intense. And I should also say that in the context of the Ukrainian war until February 2022, I thought that this problem is invented by some intellectuals and politicians, and it is being measured by opinion polls. But I think that this matter can have a real soil. So if the poll from April 2022, immediately after the war, it said that 40% of the population blames Putin and Russia for the invasion, and 40% blame Ukraine and West, and other 20 hesitate or they are ambivalent. So the question is what will Moldovans do if Russian tanks will arrive in Moldova? How will they react? So that's a challenge, but in these discussions, I actually see light at the end of the tunnel, and there is a positive outcome out of this challenge. Honored Mr. Negura, of course, we will hear more from you on this topic. Let me welcome Mr. Bochmann from Germany. I would like to thank my predecessors. I regret that Moldova is not. Moldovan Leipzig Institute is not the organizer of this event. When it comes to the challenges, and I'd like to connect it to the Moldova Institute, Leipzig Moldova Institute. We in this institute wanted to put Moldova on the map for the Moldova to be known in Germany and to create connections between the two countries and to establish connections with the space where Moldova exists and the Central European space. In this regard, I think that if I'm looking at the activity of our institute throughout the years, I should mention that actually it would be very good if in Germany we had more understanding, but also a larger availability of perceiving Moldova. In the last communication that we've had this year, we acknowledge this because it's not just about Germany who's asking where Moldova is, but it's also about a lot of challenges that occur and they are totally unknown. And the interest is not that great. So I would like people to know more about Moldova in Germany. So it's about the same thing. That my statements will be about, I'll try to say this in 60 seconds. And when I am in Moldova and I'm in conference halls like this one, in hotels or coffee shops, buses or minibuses, or when I am in schools and kindergartens, I mean, I am in different spaces where we have very different people, people from various contexts and walks of life. And as far as I'm concerned, it is important and it's a very big challenge to create this social cohesion in the country. And as a German, if I'm talking about this, I mean that we need to have a big cohesion. It's about the country, but also friendship, connections, pragmatic relations, and this form of being together somehow is absent in the narrative. And here we talk more about being too cautious, and me as a challenge. Well, I think we need to promote this connection, this link. With the help of our experts, we shall try to solve this challenge. And if we talk about the war in Ukraine, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, we would like you to give us more information about this topic. I mean, to what extent this topic is tackled. I mean, is this a divided society? Is this an essential challenge? So that opinion poll from April shows us that 40% says that Putin and Russia is to blame, and other 40 say that Ukraine and West are to blame. It's a perfect balance, perfect division. And 20 people who hesitate and they are ambivalent. The poll was repeated in the fall. The results of which show a lower percentage from these two extreme camps. But still, it's a very big proportion of ambivalent people who think that both camps are to blame or none are to blame, and hesitant people, those who don't know or don't answer. And in the same fall, another opinion poll was conducted by another company, respectable company, CBS AXA, with EPP, Public Policies Institute, who show a very big percentage of ambivalent people. 23% say that no one is to blame, and 18%, a very big percent of people who don't know how to who cannot give a clear answer. For me, this was a challenge of the spirit and of the mind. As sociologist and myself, with my brother, the Negura, who's also a sociologist in the University of Ottawa, Canada, who tried to understand this high percentage of ambivalent people and respondents, and we wanted to understand what do people think, what are the emotions that transpire in the discourse of these people, and wanted to change the approach of sociologists or the companies that take opinion polls. We want to exceed this dichotomic or binary structure between those who blame both parties. We want to see the gray areas that appear in the discourse of all of the citizens of this country. So we've done a research. One, quantitative research. We asked the people an open question, not closed question. We asked them to answer a question with an open answer, without multiple choice. So we say, with what words you associate the war in Ukraine, the phrase "the war in Ukraine." People gave a lot of phrases, and we came up with a hierarchy. So what is obvious is the topics which get people closer and don't divide them. There were a lot of words which reflect a political interpretation of the events in Ukraine, but then there are others which would highlight consensual significances. For instance, we want peace, tragedy, blood, death, fear of the war extending towards Moldova. These are elements which unify the population from Moldova instead of dividing it. So this is it. And then we went further with our research, and we've had 17 individual interviews and 2 focus groups. 2 group interviews, one in Orhei in Romanian with rural people, and another one in Chișinău in Russian. So what can be highlighted is that, first of all, even though the polls, which are quantitative, they show that the people who speak Russian, they are more inclined to justify the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Now, in our qualitative research, this is not that obvious. So there's no pre-established answer subject to the language spoken by the respondents. Instead, we've identified traditionally three subgroups of our qualitative sample. One is people who believe that Russia is to blame. Another part of respondents believe that the Ukraine and West are to blame, and others who are ambivalent. But still, our methodological approach was to see this gray nuances within each of the narratives. So these are narratives which we can identify with those that we know in the public sphere in another everyday life, and others exceed our expectations. And they exceeded our expectations as researchers. Now, when it comes to the first group, it is obvious that Russia is to blame. There were lots of positions of people, and the society in Russia are responsible for this as a country, as a society. So in both these subgroups which express firm positions, extreme positions from amongst our respondents, either Russia or Ukraine are to blame. They put the blame and responsibility on one of the parties. Russia is. I mean, which Russia? Who's the main stakeholder? Russia, somehow, as well as Ukraine or West, are built as collective entities with a collective approach. Others, each of these two groups, we could say all the three, this is a common element for the group. They say that the leaders of these countries are to blame, not the population, but leaders of those countries, and an element which connects and which goes through all of these subgroups. Now we've discovered that the narrative blaming Russia is more emotional, whereas the one which blames Ukraine and West, one is more detached. So they try to be more analytical, but they use, irony and sarcasm in order to diminish the severity of the problem, in order to diminish this interpretation that is a tragedy. It's not that big of a tragedy. They say if you look globally. One common element for the group which believes that Ukraine and West are to blame is the suspicion. I mean, to any interpretation, dominant interpretation in Moldova of this war, and as well as getting alternative sources or from social media and other sources. And then the group of ambivalents who try to see this group not as a residue, not as a residual answer from the poll, but rather as a legitimate position and separate with autonomous logic, is those who blame leaders most of all. And they're trying to make leaders as main actors and not the whole population. Some of them, they say that they're biased, they don't have enough information in order to provide some conclusive evidence. They recognize their limits, because not so there are unknown things to the public, occult things even. Many recognize that they are in shock. They see this from a perspective of chaos and uncertainty. And one thing which characterizes this subgroup and others as well, if we dig a bit further, but deeper, the leaders of the two involved countries and of other involved parties, they have to, sit down and talk and start mutual discussions in order to instill the peace. That's the element which connects everyone in, according to our quantitative research, an open question. This is a wish for peace. We want peace. And I believe, and this was the speculation that we've launched as a result of this research, is that this segment of undecided potentially a connection bridge, an element of cohesion in this divided society because of the war. And I'll stop here and I'll leave it up to the Q&A. Well, we will talk about these ideas and perspective. But a short question. What is the society specifically? If you talk about leaders, we know what leaders are, but what do people mean when they say community or society? Society For instance, Russia, U.S. against Russia, for instance. I don't think we can compare this because there is no research in Russia, but there's research which was done qualitatively, which shows there are quite a high percentage of undecided people or ambivalent people, basically, in Ukraine as well, and there we have quite a high bias factor because people cannot be frank to answer the question, which is like, who's to blame? Moreover, in Ukraine and Russia, there is a certain percentage and a trend towards ambivalence in Ukraine, for instance. And then research showed that the closer the respondents are to the place of the conflict, to the nucleus, to the core of the conflict, the more ambivalent they become in relation to the events and more available. They are more available for their country to make some trade-offs when it comes to getting peace on the land, even if fragile. In Russia we have lots of ambivalence compared to what we believe that most of the people support the war. There is also an ambivalent discourse because, of course, the dominant discourse in media say that the Russia, the war is saint and the truth is with Russia, but people hesitate when it comes to the perspective and the truth of Ukraine.
Herr Abraham, Sie haben als zweite Herausforderung ein ähnliches Thema.
A second challenge or a similar topic, a similar declaration I hear from your side. I know that you've tackled the topic of hybrid war, and it was mentioned during the two challenges. And I would like to hear what is your comment now? What is your feedback you would like to share? Well, it's not a breaking news, maybe it's the second breaking news to say that Moldova is a subject of a hybrid war on behalf of a war coming from Russia's side. What does it mean to have a hybrid war, hybrid attack? It means that even without having the tanks crossing the border, dirty money are crossing the border, and the press, the pressure in the local media actors is very high because they have a job to reach the objective set up by the Russian Federation with all the means. And in a famous Chinese wording, proverb, it says that a road of 1,000 steps starts with the first step. And if we look at the first step towards Europe, the first step would be a solid response during the census this Sunday. And I think there is a need for a moral clarity in Bessarabia based on facts. And in order to be able to speak about facts, we need to analyze the situation in communication. Situational communication, if I can put it in technical terms. Situational communication that happens here in Moldova because it comprises a constellation of political myths which are used as tools for disinformation, and unfortunately this disinformation is part of the daily life of the citizens. And disinformation is based more often on fears, exaggerating fears, and making these fears having a negative effect. Going from general to particular, one of the big topic here is the so-called losing Moldovan identity problem. And this comes with two separate sub-themes, be it that we will be assimilated by the European Imperium, and this is connected with the colonial history of some members of the EU, or the other one is Romanizing or absorbing Moldova being absorbed by Romania. And we have very closely related another fear, losing the Christian identity, the Orthodox Christian identity. And on this fear, we have a number of actors in the society that is playing on this fear. And Moldovans, being Orthodox, no matter if they pertain to the Russian church or Moldovan church, they will be assimilated and they will lose their faith as a result of growing phenomenon of atheism. The LGBTQ philosophy will arrive in Moldova, and the candid souls of Moldovans shall be lost because of the perverse Western souls. And another fear is being assimilated by the Western European capitalism. We hear this fear a lot, even in cultural events, from the south to the north. And there is this impression that foreigners that will arrive in Moldova, they will make local Moldovans their servants. So Moldovans shall become the servants and the properties will be taken over by the foreigners. At least in the rural areas, this is a very repeated fear that foreigners are going to come and buy all the land. And of course, this myth is being promoted as part of a global bigger conspiracy that bigger powers are here to purchase, and poor Moldova shall be only serving these masters. And another topic is assimilation of ethnical minorities, which is another fear. We have here Russians, Bulgarians, Gagauzi. There is a fear that all these groups will lose their identity if they will be part of the European Union, but as we know, this will not happen because the EU functions according to the principle of unity in diversity. And I would actually like to present a fifth big topic, which appeared because of the war in Ukraine, and this is becoming a part of the EU will lead to losing the sovereignty or neutrality. And all of the sudden, every Moldovan is worried about the neutrality, and everybody is afraid that once Moldova will be part of the EU, this will lead to a war with Russia. And just like Professor said earlier, who is responsible for the war? Well, it could be that the entire West is responsible for the war because the people say that the Western side provoked Russia, and if you know better, you don't provoke Russia. So we can learn from the Second World War, when poor Polish people were at the border, they killed some people, they provoked some people, and as a result this war started. But this is a wrong logic. You cannot think like this. And these five topics of the propaganda are interconnected, and they are very localized, and they are updated with new fears, recycled fears related to Romania and the relation between Moldova and Romania. Basically, Romania is presented as the main enemy, the source of all the fears, starting with the classical fear that Romania would like to annex Moldova, being an imperialistic country, and in the context of war in Ukraine, Romania has to be removed from NATO because they could lead to war in Moldova, and they infringed on the founding treaty of NATO. Another narrative that is presented here is that Romania does not provide enough support to Ukrainian displaced people and refugees, and that Ukrainians are very poorly treated in the refugee accommodation centers. Basically, we can find this related to other countries, for example, like Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic. They all mistreat the refugees from Ukraine. And another fears that come from the past. They are accumulated for the past 100 years, for example, related to the history of Bessarabia. As we know, it was mentioned in the past that there was no unification with the Great Romania, but it was an annexation, and this idea is recycled even today. And now it is mentioned that Bessarabia was a faraway gubernia region which didn't get a lot of attention, like St. Petersburg, which was in the middle of the attention. Another fear is that the Romanians don't love Bessarabia because in the 1940 they gave up the territory without any battle. Another issue is with Antonescu, obviously. Another topic, and I will go even faster a little bit because I don't want to take your time. Another is fascism and Nazism, which keeps repeating itself. Romanians are being labeled as fascism or Nazisms, even though they fought against these trends and they fought the Soviets. And another obvious fear is that the conflict in Transnistria was provoked by imperialistic ambitions of Romania, even though we know the origins of this conflict. And of course, for each of these fears, we can bring logical arguments to prove that these are just myths. But reading these fears, even very briefly, gives you an understanding, and very important to understand which is our baseline line, what is the right pathway, what is the right decision. We should go and vote this Sunday because, as we said, that this is the first step towards our pathway, and we should learn from the past so that we can make a better decision with the moral clarity and with knowing all the facts. This will help us to choose for the future. I would like to thank you, and I have a question. Florin, Mr. Abrahan. Can you tell us a few examples related to disinformation? What happened? You said that there are more and more interference. What happened in the last weeks? Thank you for the question. I can share with you because our university has a program that analyzes the informational environment and the media environment in Moldova, and the results are not necessarily public, but we have some main ideas and main conclusions, the preliminary findings, and these findings are not necessarily new. We find a lot of interference, and we see a lot of efforts to corrupt the voters, to corrupt the electoral process, which is at the basis of the democratic process. For example, purchasing votes, paying people so that they vote for who you tell them to, and other activities that interfere with the activity of the Moldovan state. And the Moldovan authorities took some measures, but I hope that these measures are in line with the volume of interference and activities. And by the way, after this, we are aiming to post or to publicize a report of our monitoring. Thank you so much. Maybe we can continue with Madam Jana Stöxen. Let's connect today with yesterday's discussion. Yesterday we had a discussion where we've announced a number of challenges, and one of them was positively seen as an opportunity. Migrating abroad is an opportunity. So I would like to repeat this question. After hearing all these details today, do you see migration as an opportunity, and do you see other challenges? Thank you so much. Yes, I am obligated to be an optimist. But I think that every family, and I think that every Moldovan could tell you more about this topic, which is actually my research topic, migration in Moldova. But we have to find the right approach. Let's look at the history. From 1990, after going through a lot of reforms and transitions of the institutions, obviously, all of these processes led to migration, and transformation always creates migration, and we see this good example in Moldova as well. And we have to analyze what kind of lifestyles existed, what led to migration, what migration meant for every person. And my colleague Jürgen Schmidt, and he did a lot of research in Germany, and he called this phenomenon as calculated migration. And I would like to use this term because migration is a very broad research field between Moldova and Germany. We can include here the plans and intentions of Moldovans that are going to Germany, and we could research this calculated step. And this is reflected into the method of using the resources, but also seeing the risks of this mobility. Some Moldovans are permanently on the way, right? In between homes, they're always coming and going. And they are currently taking 2 seats in their own homeland, Moldova, and in the destination country, Germany. And they keep coming and going. And this is not an individual migration or mobility. They involve their families now, family members. They're going through a lot of transformations and changes. And for example, when I interact with people from Moldova, be it a taxi driver or a cleaner in a hotel or any person from the street, when I interact with them, I hear from everybody that they had some form of migration, be it by themselves or be it one of their family members. The only thing that is different is the country destination of their migration. But no matter where that person is going, there is a connection back to Moldova by sending remittances, by calling, by reading the news about Moldova, by fake news, by social media. So anyways, Moldovans that go abroad, they maintain the contact with the homeland. They have a certain loyalty which crosses all the borders, and this is a deep connection. They have a deep family connection. They send money back. It's a financial connection. So this migration took political forms as well. I mean that these people are being promoted to vote. They are encouraged to keep in contact with their loved ones, to keep the contact with the homeland. And many people tell us that they would like to come back once every month, once a year, to come back to their home village. They are keeping in touch. If they have children in another country, they would like to teach the Romanian language to their children so that they can keep the connection with Moldova. They tell us that that they are maintaining this relation, they build the relation, and I think that it is in the interest of the Republic of Moldova to support it. We call it the so-called diaspora. Even though it's such a diverse group of people in different countries, they continue to have a connection to the homeland. Many people that I talk to, they don't like this term diaspora. We speak about diaspora and they make big eyes and they say, no, diaspora are other people. Diaspora are political people. It's something else than me. But no matter how they arrived in a destination country, no matter how much money they send back home, no matter if they're politically active or not, if they're voting or not, they do not like this term diaspora. And this shows how much the idea of being together as Moldovans, even if they're in Germany or in other countries, they remain united under other names, not diaspora. And being together for them is important. And having this network, even though it is a fragile one, is still resilient, it still continues to exist. It is also important to have this connection between states and Moldova, and this possibility to even send a parcel is very important. And Moldovans manage to identify different networks to send boxes, and every time you interact with Moldovans, they tell you everything is okay, and this is reflecting their mentality. And even if we have to ask them repeatedly about their situation, and we ask them how many of these mobile migrants can support Moldova, and me, I try to observe the daily activity, daily life of Moldovans in Moldova and abroad to understand how this connection with the homeland is still maintained. And I want to understand how Moldova as a country can manage to keep in touch with the Moldovans that live abroad. Just like they are successful to keep a connection with the homeland, I want to know how the state can keep a connection with them. Someone from Tiraspol had relatives in Hesa, and it's incredible how they managed to find small buses to send them a box, a goodies box. And it would be wonderful for the state to maintain the loyalty connection with its citizens, just like they are trying to maintain. And I think that such a connection could contribute to the level of optimism. And it is a plea for this transnational connection. This connection, connectivity, appears from the current life, daily life. And it happens with small gestures. Moldovans from Moldova send cheese, cottage cheese, medicines. Moldovans from abroad send back their gifts. And this creates not only connection, but clusters of connections. And it's so interesting to understand how this connection is happening at the level micro, and how can we expand it and scale it up at macro level. And what does it actually mean? What does it entail? If somebody should be involved to create, to organize diaspora, because we feel like we are missing a well-organized diaspora. Okay, we have 2 questions more. Professor Bochmann would like to add something here. I have 2 questions. And these are not even real questions, more like commentary. And maybe I can present you my dilemmas. On one hand, migration is more often related to losing the homeland. And losing one's homeland, it cannot be compensated in any way. The homeland cannot be replaced. You take some elements into the new country, but the one thing that remains is the language. And me as a linguist, I care about this question. What can the country do to help the migrants to compensate these losses, at least at the language level. I know that currently in Germany it's almost impossible to provide all refugees, for example, from Syria, Afghanistan, and many other countries, but also even refugees from closer countries like Georgia or Moldova. It's impossible to provide teaching in their native language. In England, there was some classes provided in 25 languages. But the dilemma is the following. In Germany, we have about 12,000 doctors coming from Romania. And the number of doctors coming from Moldova is unknown to me, but certainly there is a big number there as well. Because medicine studies are long-term, there is a high-quality teaching process, and after completing the studies, there is a high interest to find a job in medicine in the Western Europe. And we have collaborated for a few years with the medical university, and Leipzig University. This university requested our support to train the nurses in Leipzig so that they remain to work in Leipzig, coming from Moldova. So if they will come to be trained in Leipzig, obviously they will want to stay and work there. This means that we create a gap. We create a problem for the local medical system in Moldova. Obviously, people with higher education can go and work abroad. But we don't know what would be the solution here. It is a dilemma. We want to support people, but at the same time we don't want to make the local system hurt. Okay, I would like to ask how much Europeanization happens through this connection. So, when you ask Moldovans, are they coming back? They say yes or no, and what are the reasons? Okay, I will try to reply. Obviously, the absolute dilemma is that we have a lack of balance, and we cannot solve it in a scientific way. Yes, many Moldovans continue to live in Moldova, be it that they are highly qualified or not so much qualified, they stay and work in Moldova. But if you go to a big hospital in Germany, starting with the leadership and ending with the low qualified personnel, you will find so many nationalities, including Moldovans, hired at different levels. And I have the impression that many people would like to come and work if their working conditions are good. And if they have some good conditions, and people that are migrating, they share about their experience. They said that initially they wanted to complete their studies in Germany. And then they said they would like to gain a little bit of work experience and then return back to Moldova. But the reality is, after making the effort of finding a job, people tend to stay at the job. And the dilemma of those who return back to the homeland is the lack of trust regarding long-term development of the country and opportunities that it provides. For example, I spoke with somebody that had a negative experience migrating in Germany. For example, it was very hard for them to find a job, to maintain it. And they were saying, yes, I understand that there's a different context, and we appreciate the European Union and Germany and all the member states. And we consider that the EU and the EU accession is the right pathway for Moldova, but they have a lack of trust regarding the regarding Moldovans that only enjoy the country part-time. They come and see only the good side. Oh, your park is so green, your prices are so low. They come and purchase left and right, and after that they go back to Germany, whilst the country remains to face its challenges until the next summer. So these are Moldovans that come in vacation in Moldova, enjoy all the best. And losing the homeland that was mentioned earlier, losing the homeland can happen, but we notice that Moldovans keep in touch by sending remittances, sending the boxes of goodies. I know that in Berlin there is a very close circle of friends, Moldo-Germans, that not only keep the contact with the homeland, but do a lot of charitable work, do a lot of activities, cultural activities. We see the same experience with the NGOs that promote the Moldo-German friendship. And these are methods of collaboration, of keeping in touch with the homeland. And we need to continue the political discussions. We need to continue the social discussions. And me, I document everything that I see. I try to explain it, but ultimately I see that no real solution was identified. We need to count on people to be active, to take an initiative. This is what I've noticed while speaking with people. I've noticed that in their narrative, in their imagination, what they have in their imagination as Europe is not the reality. And with the positive and with the negative, EU is still seen as a very good option for Moldova. There are 40,000 Moldovans in Germany according to official data, but obviously it's a small number because many Moldovans traveled with Romanian passports, and we don't know the exact number of Moldovans currently living in Germany. And Europe remains to be a dream, even though it's not fully perfect, it remains to be a dream and a destination. Okay, thank you so much. Now let's listen to Mr. Bochmann's opinion, and he will present the Moldo-German relations from the scientific point of view. Yesterday we had a clear signal speaking about how important it is to have support from Germany so that Moldova goes through the process of being closer to Europe. Can you please speak on this as well?
So this is in the context of many issues we discussed today, and they are very important issues that have to be solved urgently. And here we'll talk about relations between the academia in Germany and Moldova, and they're not that. And they need to be extended. Let me tell you what we have when it comes to science between Moldova and Germany. I couldn't give you a general overview, but let me share with you my personal experience when I talk about something or from what I've gained as experience in the Moldova Leipzig Institute. That comes from my personal experience or from my recollections when I studied in Bucharest in 1960. After that, when I came home, and I went back to Bucharest to a congress, the professor Silviu Berejanu, a linguist from the Linguistic Institute of the Academy of Science, I'm still connected, not very tight, but connected to them. My studies in Romania. I couldn't talk from the perspective of those times, because at the time Moldova's topic was a taboo in that region, but back in the time we looked at Moldova as being part of the Soviet Union. In 1989, when we had political transformations, enormous ones, this is when we created relations with the newly established state. And in '96, we launched a very big project funded by a foundation. And this is when we started to talk about the language spoken in Moldova. And we had a linguistic controversy when we asked whether Moldovan language is a language or this is something which was invented. And we have to see what is the scientific linguistic foundation and whether there is a linguistic research in order to understand this issue. And we needed to understand what is this all about in Moldova and in the Moldovan and in the Romanian Moldova. The official language, or I better say the language spoken by the population in the country, in north or south, east, west, from Prut River. And we had a very big number of fellows, of colleagues from the University of Leipzig and from Berlin or from Frankfurt am Main. And our partners were linguists from the Linguistic Institute of the Academy of Science from Moldova, from the State University of Moldova, from the University in Belz. We actually wanted to tackle this political issue, whether there is a Moldovan language. We actually wanted to see what are the linguistic relations and how do things look like when it comes to the spoken language in this country. Many colleagues have looked at this question as an opportunity to prove that Moldovan language is an invention and that it wasn't simple to be proven, but we wanted to exclude this question, to rule it out. So what was a problem in this regard was that we looked at behavior and the attitude of our colleagues from here. We saw various features. Features which would make their job harder, meaning that here there was an inheritance of the political past, of the Soviet past. We saw very well developed hierarchical relations. A young student, an assistant, who was part of a group, and if he asked a question, then they would look at the secretary and they look at the direction of the teacher, of the professor, in regarding that student, and then he could just stop and not talk anymore. This authoritarian behavior was an impediment, actually, to develop the culture of discussion and dialogue. For the Linguistic Research Institute, what was important was grammar, spelling, and the cultivation of the language. That was also, the language actually was also an important aspect in this regard. So, if you talk about the standard language which is spoken in Bucharest, I mean Romanian, people are not prepared for this approach, because if you talk about it from the 1970s, one tried to introduce a culture of the Moldovan language from the 70s and on. And that was a very intensive activity. It meant that in the area of research, the outcomes of the research came with a lot of evidence, linguistic evidence, and which were not quite appropriately transferred or spoken about. And oftentimes they would correct even the results of the research. And we made the results of this research public in 2 volumes. On the one hand, this was one topic that I wanted to mention, and on the other hand, if we talk about 2005, when we created in Moldova the Moldova Leipzig Institute, we wanted to promote and make Moldova known. On the other hand, another task was to initiate connections, relations between Moldova and Germany at the level of the universities. Specifically to intermediate and create partnerships. And I think that in the context of these 2 languages, we were quite productive. And today we can see that we already have guides about Moldova. And Mr. Müller is one of those who edited. We have a guide that wouldn't have been possible without the involvement of many of our partners from Moldova. We've organized the summer camp in Chișinău for 14 years for students, pupils, and PhDs from Germany in Moldova. So I said that I've been doing this summer camp. We've been doing this summer camp in Moldova for 14 years, and we tried to organize Romanian language courses. Also, a lot of sightseeings, meetings, discussions with the representatives of the civil society and the scientists. Unfortunately, this year we couldn't do it. We couldn't do this program because the interest from Germany has subsided a lot. So maybe Moldova is so known now that these activities are not anymore necessary. What we want is to organize workshops, meetings, specifically in the areas where we see that there is a lack or a deficit. And here we talk about the Moldovan society. We talk about issues such as issues to do with history or questions about history. Workshops and trainings in the area of the culture of memory. Programs which I brought here with me, and here we talk about mediation of human rights from the point of view of history. We talk about teachers of history who showed interest towards these areas, media resources, and the interest or representation of or how women are represented in this area. media skills, discussing Soviet symbols, identity in the cultural space, monuments and identity, reports about the environment. So this would be some of the topics. Those many topics that we tried to tackle while doing our work. We focused a lot on school manuals, and what is very important is we had a cooperation with the Institute for Manuals, and this year we we wrote actually a new history manual which should appear this year on the market, which was developed by Moldovan historians for elementary schools. Apologies, Professor. Let me ask you two questions, and it's about the fact that let me see if I understood you correctly. If you think about then, in the past, the challenge was that Moldova had this, had this Soviet heritage while teaching, and to what extent this is being discussed in the society. And you at the beginning said that you were saying at the beginning that Moldova was not very known in Germany, and because of that, we mentioned the minimum financing or very low financing for this area. These contradictions, they're clear, and if you talk about the new generations in the area of research, we have researchers, young researchers, young scientists who are not facing topics like this, like authoritarian regimes. So we have to mention here the academia, who have contributed to more awareness about Moldova in Germany, but they have written a lot of scientific articles about Moldova, joint projects, and which focus on the relations with Moldova. And one more thing, what was the question? The second question? The second question was about the funding. At that point, was this a challenge in the past to provide funding and support for Moldova? Yes, the funding is a problem for all of us. All of the associations are facing this issue. Moldova Leipzig Institute is an association. Actually, it's an organization, is not an institute. And for each project, we need to apply to gain a project. Out of 5 projects for which we apply, we get financing for 1. Yeah? And it's like an NGO. And the context is sad in this regard because in the context of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the situation is a bit better because neighborhood of Ukraine has good effects when it comes to the projects with Moldova. Now, our projects, as a rule, they are not just for Moldova, but they are for most of the events that we organize. We also invite researchers, men and women from Ukraine, Georgia, and sometimes from Armenia. We used to invite in the past people from Belarus as well, but the projects are... So participants come from Ukraine and Georgia. That's what I'm trying to say. So the problem of an institute, which is an organization, is that money is limited, resources are limited, and a lot depends on the enthusiasm of our men and women. So it is based on people doing voluntary job, and sometimes it's about unpaid work as well. Now we have some challenges that we've collected, and we discussed some of the topics. But to give some positive, to start the Q&A session in a more positive light, you talked about disinformation, Mr. Negura. You talked about attitude towards the war in Ukraine. We talked about Moldo-German relations and migration. So what would be your recommendations in order to better tackle these subjects and to focus on the strengths of Moldova? I think the key thing that we need to have into consideration, given what has been discussed in the first half of the day, and namely whether 2030 is as a fata morgana or a realistic objective for Moldova to be part of the European family. I think, and this is an effort of the government, and we need a multi-layered effort. Of course, the government is first, but the researchers, the academia, wherever you go in Europe, it is important. It's important to say that Moldova should not be tied to Ukraine, and that if Ukraine will postpone its EU integration indefinitely, this shouldn't happen to Moldova. Moldova must be judged according to its own merit, and it has a population which deserves that. It has leaders who strive, who make effort, and actually we should not compare it to Turkey. Turkey is another matter. It's a totally different matter. I mean, one cannot compare a postponement of decades of negotiations of Turkey joining Europe and Chișinău joining Moldova joining European Union. So that is the key one, to keep up the optimism and to convince the decision makers from other member states of the EU that Moldova must be judged not just according to geopolitical rationale, which can change, and they will change very likely in the next years to come, but Moldova should be judged according to its own merit. It has to be looked at as a candidate in its own right, and it must be rewarded for that. It must be rewarded because it brings added value to the whole European Union. Let me focus on the positive part of the preliminary results of our research, meaning that the population of Moldova is unified around some items and not divided in some fundamental and core issues. It is unified in the name of peace and some values that it shares, but also unified around the fears that they share because of this war in Ukraine. And I think that the intellectual, political, university elites, they must overcome this methodological distortion, which is to divide population into halves and to delegitimize, to disqualify the ambivalent segment. To the contrary, the promise that we see from these results is that there is a big chunk of the population who wants peace and who sees this war as a huge tragedy. And beyond the explanations and interpretations when it comes to political blame for this strategy, and this is how we need to build our strategies of social cohesion in Moldova. So, to continue on this positive light, indeed, I've heard the comment of Ms. Gill that Moldova, we believe, look, I've heard the metaphor Moldova is in the waiting room, is the cloakroom of the European Union. And yeah, indeed, it is right, Moldova is in the waiting room. And now we are in this situation. But Moldovan citizens, have been in Europe for many, many years, and the people in Germany, France, or any other country, I mean, we already have people from Moldova present there. We see people from Moldova on the streets, and sometimes these people, they are on private matters. So it's not about, we have the presence of Moldovans. You cannot associate the presence of Moldovans only with scandals and migration. And here we can see that we represent the situations as ideas, Moldovan ideas, in Germany, and one can see that we can tackle these people from different points of view. And people from Moldova present there, they do contribute to the, spreading of these ideas. When we have research in the area of migration, from a point of view of science, culture, or systems that we are researching in the context of people who migrate, we can see that there is hope, goals, and we can see a form of people becoming Europeans. And people are a village, people know each other, and if you talk about various towns, people are present in various lands or towns or cities in Germany. Maybe Professor Bochmann, you want to fill in and provide us some recommendations that we should take into consideration if you talk about what all colleagues mentioned. No recommendations. All right, so no recommendations for us of how to tackle the challenges. I think the most important here is to talk amongst ourselves. Where we have issues is to talk, is to communicate, and to try and solve the problems as they appear, to talk, to communicate as they occur. This is what we're doing now. Here we see people who want to talk. I think it's enough for you to raise your hand. And all right, the gentleman from the last row. I have a question about what Mr. Negura said. It's about the referendum. I mean, now we have elections, presidential elections, together with the referendum. But what is of interest to me is that there is parties. We have parties that are pro-European parties. But They detach from these elections. It's about anchoring. As a result of this referendum, we should anchor this change in the constitution about the European orientation of Moldova. But this is being used as pro-NATO anchoring of Ukraine, and the use of it by Kremlin and by its propaganda machine. The third question is about the fear about the loss of neutrality by joining the EU. But yesterday we talked about neutrality in the European Union. The question still is whether there is a discussion about joining NATO. Outside this idea of neutrality. We talk about the fact that a couple of months ago there is some time between when the decision to become the candidate country and until Moldova became candidate country. It's a 3.5 years period. It will be 2030, and that is not such a long period. All right, so we had 3 questions here and a comment, and maybe now we should try and answer until we get the next question, because we discussed a lot about it. So, about the legitimacy of the referendum, of connecting presidential elections with the referendum. I think that it is legitimate to have in the constitution provisions about belonging to the EU as we have them in the Romanian constitution, and we haven't yet finished our accession negotiations, but those we've done those changes in 2003. Well, citizens of Moldova should vote in the referendum and who they want as president. It doesn't matter who will win these presidential elections. Of course, I don't think we can go with Mr. Voronin, who is not a candidate. And we couldn't go with Voronin to Brussels, but it's important to have provisions which should be in the constitution and which should enshrine, especially in such a divided society, the stable option of majority of the population in a certain area. When it comes to neutrality, if I understood well the translation, Austria is a neutral state in the EU. Well, they're good. They're doing good. There's no problem. When it comes to neutral state, I don't know why Moldova would puts neutrality as its supreme value. I understand Switzerland. Well, look, other stronger states such as Finland or Sweden said that, well, it's naive to think that you could be neutral and not to be attacked by the bear. To try and answer the question, indeed, this split in the society, this division of the society is very important in the context of the referendum and the elections that will happen next Sunday. I think that at the society level, the population sees things a bit in a more pragmatic way, and the decisions that they take are guided by the quality of life that they have and the appreciation that they have when it comes to the political class. So the population sometimes reads and understands the living conditions, the everyday life, and we have here, we need to understand how they provide for that. So more people see it differently, those who know how to govern and those who don't know how to govern, and sometimes they're right or not, because this government had to run against the clock in the context of the COVID crisis and this war in Ukraine. And the comparison is not done perfectly in the lab conditions of how this government worked and how other previous governments worked.
Now it's revelating to analyze the parties, especially one of them, a party that was well known for corruptive acts, high-level corruption, is supported by Moscow. And now the same parties are trying to promote good governance, and they're taking the role of promoting the EU. So such a position is speaks volumes, and we have to maybe try to understand why these parties switched their position. Would you like to add about NATO? I think that this crisis shows us once again that we need more protection. For example, Ukraine wants protection, and we are grateful that Ukraine is protecting us. Obviously, they're not doing that by desire, but they're protecting themselves, and indirectly they're protecting us. And NATO is a controversial topic in Moldova. Half of population doesn't want this for Moldova, and the other half wants even more actively than they wanted this NATO integration 2 years ago. But we have to talk about this, and the question that we should ask ourselves is, even with NATO, how do we defend ourselves? And NATO could be a reply, but I don't know, we have to talk about it, we have to look into it. Okay, Mr. Martins, what about the next question? Well, let's start replying. The first question is, when you said that when you are on the street, you talk to Moldovans and you talk to them in Romanian because Moldovan language doesn't exist. Why did you say Moldovan language? You know that such a language doesn't exist. That is the first question. The next one would be for Mr. Negura. Do you hear us, Mr. Negura? Okay, you understand in German. Okay, excellent. In the past 20 years, I lived in Eastern Balkan countries, and I lived there. And I'm very surprised by the level of optimism that exists there around the EU accession, because in my mind, I don't see this integration very fast. I know that Balkanic countries are negotiating for almost 10 years without concrete results or concrete hope. Maybe in another discussion we will go into detail. For example, if we speak about the past 10 years, 33 chapters were discussed, and we need 20 more years. For example, let's take the example of Montenegro. So it's a very slow process, and it's a very dark future. And doesn't this transform this optimism into disappointment? And the slow progress still sounds like German language for me. So even though I hear a dialect, I will call it Moldovan, meaning Romanian, or vice versa. It was a mistake of expressing myself. If I will be in Cluj, of course, I will hear a different dialect of the Romanian language. Or if we see the different personal style of people, what we hear here in Moldova, it's very different from the Romanian spoken in Romania. But me, as a non-speaker of Romania, I can understand that they just speak a dialect. And by the way, we identify people, their original location, not only by language, but by additional details that the person is giving us. For example, Some people from the former Soviet Republic, instead of fridge, they keep saying холодильник in Russian. And by this inclusion of Russian words, we understand that they're from Moldova. Speaking about a high level of optimism for Moldova, and compared to other countries, I would say that 10% average support this a lot. And we sometimes see the EU as the solution of all problems. Other people see the EU accession as a solution to all their problems, which is not obviously going to happen. But at the same time, I understand the attempt of Moldovan elites to present the EU accession as a very positive thing, especially now when Moldova has been threatened on multiple layers, from the economical layer to the media attacks. As we know, Moldova was fully dependent on Russia for the energy sources. It's still dependent on Russia on other elements, and I understand why the elites keep selling the idea of EU such highly promoted. But I think that we should be fair and present secondary consequences as a result of the EU accession and as a result of a very fast negotiations. For example, maybe some parts of the legislation will not be fully harmonized, or they will not be fully adapted to the local context. So this opens the door for disappointment as well. But the pro-European elites that are currently active in Moldova see the EU accession first as the main goal, and after that we shall see. We shall tackle the deceptions as they come after the EU integration of Moldova. Thank you so much. Would you like to comment more? Well, just like it happens before the night of your wedding. If you know everything, you will not get married anymore. You need to have a level of optimism. You need to have a level of mystery. Otherwise, nobody is going to get married. Another thing, the complicated situation of the Balkanic, Eastern Balkan countries. Yes, it's another topic. We can talk about it in details. But Moldova is on one hand has a more simple situation, and on the other hand has a more specific and complex situation. But we can have another discussion regarding the Western and Eastern Balkan countries. At the moment, I would like to encourage the Moldovan population to be resilient and to be active in their own pathway. Heinrich Kreft is my name, from Budapest University, and I have a position in the Ministry of Exterior as well. And let me speak about Transnistria. Do you see Transnistria as an obstacle in Moldova's pathway for EU accession? Well, in July we spoke about this topic, and we said that the status of the EU candidate country already brings its own problems between Moldova and Transnistria, and it brings another wave of issues in this relation. And the question is, how can we remove these issues, and how can we improve the situation for Moldova and Transnistria? Okay, I accept your challenging question, but I can tell you there are no miraculous solutions in this sense. This is a elephant in the room situation with Transnistria. Sometimes we can see it from the perspective of you cannot join the EU because you have Transnistria and vice versa. But let me quote the report issued by Ovidius Institute about 20 years ago. And basically this report raised a huge number of comments from my point of view, so that Bessarabia is no longer captive by Transnistria, so this expansion of this region doesn't continue. The solution can only be one, and I'm speaking about placing under international UN guardianship of this region, and after that the region has to be demilitarized and decriminalized with international tools, and this perspective can be seen a more realistic one, but also can be part of a broader number of activities, and we can discuss this Transnistrian issue together with Ukrainian topic. Let's say if Ukraine would like to solve Transnistrian problem, they could solve it very fast, but what we see is that not even Ukraine is eager to tackle this at the moment because of obvious reasons. They have other issues, but I know all the comments regarding maintaining sovereignty over the constitutional territory, whilst de facto Moldova doesn't have any jurisdiction there, and the population that lives between Dnestro and Prut are kept captive because of this territory which continues to remain under occupation. Wait, I would like to say that there is a big dilemma in Transnistria and the population that lives there regarding Europe and Russia, because mentally, culturally, they belong to the Russian space, Russian culture, and on the other hand, looking at the economy and production processes, they are fully integrated into the EU market because majority of their goods, majority of their products made in Transnistria are exported into Romania and EU. So from that point of view, they're even closer into the EU than we believe and what they believe. So probably these two levels could be harmonized, and for example, the opinion of the citizens could be listened to more once their freedoms and fundamental rights could be observed by the authorities. But as we know, the local authorities are pro-Russian, and they put pressure on the media, and they put pressure on the local society, and this creates a loyalty towards Russia. And they continue to promote this skepticism, and the local population continues to have this dilemma. On one hand, being closer to Russia, and on the other hand, being closer to the EU. Mr. Negura, can I ask you something? Did I understand you correctly that the road further is to make Moldova as attractive as possible? For example, because this openness will lead to well-being. Well, I cannot speak about it because I'm not an expert, and maybe somebody in the room can add more information here. But yes, of course, Moldova needs to become attractive from the economic point of view, because this could be the best strategy from one point of view. Trade and commerce always brings country closer, and even though we know this, the crisis in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine shows us once again how fragile the society is, because there is interference, there is these hybrid influences from Russia, and these distorted opinion of the society. And yes, it's important for Moldova to become a model for development, to prove that they are able to develop, to prove that they are able to grow economically, to prove their worth. But obviously, this is not an immediate and all-functioning solution. This is just an approach. Hanke Fabricius. So maybe my question is not destined for one speaker, but for anyone. I would like to ask, what about the power of faith, a power of churches, the power of religious groups, power of different minorities? Do we have any space for action? Do we have any power there? And how open are discussions on this topic? The religious group and their level of power. And it's an open question for everyone. Okay, if we speak about migration, yes, the churches are those organizations that help communities, help migrants that go to other countries. We're talking about Romanian churches which bring priests from Moldova. I don't know as many situations, but I know many situations where churches from Germany bring priests from Romania to guide the community, the Romanian-speaking community. But I know that priests cannot support themselves from their job as a priest, and oftentimes they have another job, they have another position, and they use this role as a spiritual leader only in the weekend, only as a volunteering position. They might baptize the children in the weekend, they do the religious rituals as they do here in Moldova, but they do all of these rituals in improvised spaces, very small spaces, which is unusual for the Orthodox religion. But people take the religion and the rituals from Moldova to their destination country. Speaking about like sanctifying things, this is done once per year, but priests usually that work in Germany, they have another job that is their main income, and the priest activity is more of a additional. One of the priests from Romania worked in a butcher house. He was butchering meat, and oftentimes the job that they do during their working week is in a way butting heads with the activity of the religious leader. But they make it work because they would like to promote the rituals, and also sometimes people that migrate do not accommodate well in the destination country, and then we have to think, what is the future of those people? Where do they find additional guidance? If the faith, if the church is not there, where we create a space for them to find guidance? Well, I can add here that the Romanian church from Leipzig is well positioned. The people built a new church at the outskirts of the city. I was invited many times at their religious celebrations, and I saw many Moldovans that came and participated, and they declared themselves under the umbrella of this church. I would like to add something additionally. Speaking about it strictly theoretically, the society in Moldova is pretty unified. We have 98% of Moldovans being Orthodox Christians, but we have the political fragmentation, and we have two bishops. And the territory of the country is divided and controlled by two foreign churches. One is managed by the Moscow church and bishop, and one is managed by the Romanian bishop. So this leads to a fragmentation of the society as well, because of the fragmentation of churches. And now, since the war in Ukraine started, we've noticed some very interesting phenomenon. About 20 priests migrated from the churches that belonged to the Russian managed churches. They migrated to the Romanian led church network. And we had some attempts of the bishop from Moscow to bring them back, but they resisted. They say that we no longer support this bishop that is supporting the war. Also, we have seen the migration of people of faith from one church led by Russia and by a bishop from Moscow to the other one. So we've seen this division, and we see that even in their daily activity there is a good understanding. In other regions, people don't care about who the church belongs to, because the priest doesn't do any political speeches, whilst in other regions the priests are specifically telling them about the politics, about the regions and so on. So it's very different. Do we have any other questions? Janka Fugel from Berlin. I have a question for Jana Stöxen. My question is, how do you assess during your research project, how do you see the Moldovan diaspora, and how does the politics play in diaspora? Thank you for the question. I've tried to contact the Relations with Diaspora Bureau placed in Chișinău, and I know that this bureau is very close to the current leadership, and I also try to research the social media and other news to see what is the situation with Moldovans in diaspora, if they're involved in politics or not. And what I've noticed is that they do a lot of cultural activities. They do a lot of summer camps for Moldovan children born abroad, so that they can come back and see the local homeland. I know that there are a number of courses about the language of Moldova, about the culture of Moldova, history. But oftentimes I ask myself, from one hand, I see a lot of activities which are organized, and I see this policy for diaspora. I see many measures and activities conducted by the leading government, and on the other hand, I see individual people for which the word diaspora is not a pleasant concept. They say that the word diaspora doesn't include them, and this means that I am in a dilemma, and I can't think about having a reply to this dilemma in 1 year. Maybe I need to take another event and speak more with Moldovans to understand why they are not included in diaspora. And I think that this will be a challenge for Moldova as well, to integrate Moldovans abroad into a strong diaspora. But I think that diaspora needs a level of credibility, and I think that all these wonderful pictures from their cultural events, these pictures which reflect the efforts, must happen periodically. So these events should not happen randomly or spontaneously, and should not only happen during the summer as a summer camp for the children born abroad, but it should be part of a long-term strategy. But yes, I agree that what I see and what is organized is very nice, but I don't see a long-term strategy. And we don't know how these events and activities will be accepted in the future. Okay, with that, I think we arrived at the end of this discussion, which is actually very similar to a Netflix episode, because there are so many questions and so many perspectives, but we've tried to promote the presence of Moldova in the world. We hope that we were successful. We would like to thank you for your attention, for your participation. Wait, is there another question? Have we missed someone? If there is one more person to ask a question, please raise your hand. Or maybe it's okay to take the question in the next phase of our conference. I was speaking about marriages, right? In Europe, we no longer have the traditional style of marriage. We have different type of partnerships, different types of relations that are more and more popular in Europe. And my question is, beyond the EU member objective for Moldova, is there a tactical level to this? So it's obvious that we want to have the Moldova as a member of the EU. But on the other hand, the free economic zone is already achieved. Moldova participates in the free economic area. There is also that mobility mechanism. There is, if we take Ireland or Turkey, what is their role? How can they do step by step and achieve their final objective as EU member states, but at the same time to maintain their own level of independence and sovereignty? Okay, I would like to comment here, even though very briefly. Speaking about civil partnership, you said that yes, in the EU this happens, and here being in Chișinău, we are reflecting a concubine relation. This means that we live together, but we have not been to the priest, we have not been to sign a marriage document. But if we have children, it's very important for the children that there is a marriage certificate. So it's the same for Moldova. Yes, we live together, right? We make deals together, but for the future children, for the future, it's important to have that marriage certificate. So yes, if we are in concubine relation, we are together, but in reality we are not together. Let's look at the roaming costs. Yeah, we live together, but we pay more. This is why it's important to get the marriage certificate, to go to Brussels, to sign it, to have the approval of all 27 countries. And by the way, I've never seen a country that after becoming new member to be in a worse situation than before. So I don't think that this marriage will lead to anything negative. Certainly we will have the opportunity to continue these discussions this evening. I would like to thank you, Professor Abraham. I would like to thank you, Professor Negura, Professor Bochmann, Madam Stöxen. Thank you so much for all your speeches and for tackling all these wonderful topics. And on this very positive note, I would like to thank the moderator as well. I would say that we met our objective. This means that the scientific conference was successful. Our goal was to leave you speechless, right? And I think we made it. We are not gathered here today to propose concrete solutions. We are here to discuss. We are here to explore. I remember Mr. Marcuse, who was saying, in order to continue, we need to discuss more. And we have to continue the discussions. The future will show itself.